My earliest memories are going up to see my dad, who ran the mailroom for Springs. At that time, Springs was, their operation was at the corner of Main and of White Street and of Art Street. And we would go up during the afternoon to go visit with my dad. The great thrill was riding the elevator, which was something we didn't see a whole lot of in a little town like Lancaster.
My earliest memory of Lancaster is having a job at Buckaloo Variety Store, 12 years old. My job was to keep the front windows clean and do a little sweeping, and even had a chance to go in the basement and clean the floors down there. And that's where Buckaloo kept all the candy, so I enjoyed going down there.
I think probably my earliest memory is the bakery. That was something that was always very exciting for us, particularly around holidays. I remember going in, we would always enter through the back entrance. I don't know why, but we did. And you'd see the racks and racks of cookies, and I remember the bat-shaped cookies. And my mom's favorite was always the butter cookie with the little dollop of raspberry jelly on top. And it was just always a fun time for us. We'd get really excited about the idea of going to the bakery on Saturdays.
The thing that stands out the most about Main Street was going to the parades as a kid. The parades were a big deal in a little town like Lancaster, particularly in the 1960s. I was born in 1956, so my formative years were in the 60s and early 70s. And one of the highlights of the year was the Christmas parade, because if you were in the Scouts, or if you were, a little later on, if you were in the Boy Scouts, or if you simply wanted to go see your friends, you would go to the parade. And everyone participated, everyone showed up, everyone talked about it. And Main Street was the center of activity.
I think the parades used to be such a big deal, and I think they are still for children in the community, but that was just something that everybody got excited for. You'd see all the beauty queens in the parade, which, I was always fascinated with. I mean, they were like mini royalty to me, a royalty of Lancaster at least, and so that was always fun.
I mean, it was a really dynamic place. It was a place to be seen, but also to do everything from go see my dad at Springs to buy clothes and buy shoes. All that happened in about a 2-block radius of the Main Street and White Street area. And a heck of a lot of fun, that spending time up there. And I've got to say, even when I'm 61 years old now, when I ride by that Main Street area, and I did it yesterday when I was visiting my mom, I think about those periods of time there with things like the parade, and also that sort of freedom to roam in that area without feeling that I had to be under my parents' wing all the time.
Probably my favorite lunch place was Williams Drugstore. I used to love going in there. They had the best chicken salad, but it was actually made with turkey. So I found that out some years later, and but it was so good, and it was just always so fun because you would run into people that you knew, and I think that was what made it more interesting. It wasn't that it was just had this fabulous atmosphere. There was nothing fancy about going to Williams Drugstore, but it was the people there and the great conversations that you would have, and that was something that my mom and I did almost every single Saturday, so it was very special to me.
City Drugstore. My doctor's office was Dr. Crawford, who went to medical school in I think the early 1900s, probably like 1920. He was an older doctor who had an office in that same complex where the Springs facilities were. And there was a drugstore in the front of it where my family traded, called City Drugstore. What I remember about it is they had the absolute best ham and cheese and chicken salad sandwiches imaginable. And that would be a place that we go if you went to the doctor and had to get a shot or something like that. My mother would take me by City Drug as a reward after it was over. And it was one of those great places where you see people that you would see people who were coming through town. They would walk through City Drug because they could park over on Art Street, on White and Art Street, and they would tend to walk through City Drug. If you were sitting there, you'd see people you knew coming through who were going to walk around downtown to shop.
You heard of George's Knick-Knack? Oh, the best hamburgers in the world. I can still taste them. Later on, people used to call that the Hill over there on Gay Street. It's right where Dr. Boykin's office was. That's where the barbershop, Shropshire Barbershop was. That's where we all went to get haircuts, and my dad and I, and sometimes Dad would help Mr. Shropshire cut some hair so we wouldn't have to wait so long. So that was the center of our recreational, our community right there on Gay Street, Gay and Pleasant Hill. So George's Knick-Knack was right there. And the soda shop was right across the street from that. So that was the center of everything. Some of the older people in Lancaster remember the first swimming pool that we as African Americans had was a hand-me-down. But we loved that pool. It was on Gay Street.
One of the institutions that remains open that was incredibly important to all of us was the 903 Grill, home of the best cheeseburgers and French fries imaginable. And I finished high school in 1975, as I think I mentioned earlier. For my group that started driving in 1972 or so, a Friday or Saturday night trip to the 903 was something that was a lot of fun. And the place had car hops at the time, still does, even to this day.
But CB's would have absolutely been my favorite store on Main Street. I mean, it was every little girl's dream, right? And it was so sad to see it come down, because even my daughter actually got to see an establishment that had been there for a long time and said, "I dream of getting my prom dress there one day, Mom." So we'll find a different place, but that was definitely a beautiful store.
Well, I see one of my favorite places to shop, Haney's, and where's Woodley's? Woodley's should be there somewhere also. I see Robinson Cloud. That's where my mother spent a lot of time, Robinson Cloud.
A place that my mother liked to go shop was a place called Robinson Cloud, run by two brothers, R.B. Robinson and Cloud Robinson. And Mr. Cloud Robinson ran the men's side of the store, and you'd normally find him sitting in the chairs over by where the shoes were sold. That's where all the local business people, everyone from Colonel Springs through Jim Bradley, who would go hang out on their breaks and go talk to Cloud Robinson. And that was a real local institution.
As we grew up, we had guys who were very talented. Maurice Williams was the talent. He developed a band called Gladiolas, and Maurice he was the leader of that band, and several of us tried to hang with him a little bit. He would get in the auditorium at lunchtime. And we had every day we'd have our little concerts right at lunchtime in the auditorium at Bar Street High School. But I wasn't one of the regular members of that band. I wanted to go to Nashville with them when they went to record Little Darling, and my dad wouldn't allow that. He said, "No, you can't go." And that was probably the best thing for me. I didn't need to go. But Maurice, we were so proud of him. Later on, Maurice even played for Miss Lancaster pageant right over here at Lancaster High School. And that was a big deal back then for somebody like Maurice to do the entertainment at a Miss Lancaster pageant. Maurice was a good friend of mine. His mother would buy him the little nickel pants, that with the rubber below the knees. And he and I were the only two boys in town that wore those kind of pants. But he was a nice guy, really nice guy, and we were so proud that when he started making it big, he made it kind of big.
There's another great story that they tell about a bootlegger in town back in the 1930s or 40s who the police were after, and he had a habit of racing through town at a real high rate of speed, and the police assumed he had his packages in the back of the car. The police would chase him out of town. to which behind him was the car that really had the liquor in it, that would then go to make the deliveries with the police all in pursuit of the person who they knew to be the bootlegger.
Well, probably one of my funniest stories about doing something crazy like that is when it snowed, you know, which it doesn't do here very often. My brother and those went and got a car hood from the junkyard and tied it to the back of his truck. And they would sit on the back of the car hood, and that was their sled. The truck would pull them around. And my parents absolutely told him I was not allowed own, but the guys kind of let me own. And of course, the one time they did, they kicked it and it went straight into a tree. All of them bailed off except for me, and I went straight into the tree and straddled the tree. It was crazy. And I had a huge knot on my leg and did not tell my parents. I was terrified to tell my parents because I didn't want my brother to get in trouble. But then I was watching Little House on the Prairie, and the particular child they thought might have to have a limb amputated. And so I was panicked thinking, I've got this wound and I'm gonna have to have my leg amputated. So I finally had to break down and tell my parents, and I felt so bad because my brother did get in trouble, but that was such a highlight. It was so much fun. It was definitely a daredevil thing to do, and I wouldn't advise anybody to do it.
There was a guy that owned a hotel down on the south side of town. I won't say his name right now because of the story I'm getting ready to tell, but the local legend has it that, that this gentleman had a problem with places burning down that he owned, and that many of these places were insured, and that he went in to see his insurance agent one time to see about buying some insurance, and he told his agent that he had, the agent told him that he couldn't sell him any more fire insurance because he'd had this terrible history of things unfortunately burning down due to fire. And he said, well, what kind of insurance can you sell me? And he said, I can sell you some storm insurance. To which the store owner said, I don't know how to start no storm.
My first summer job was working at the hospital. I worked in medical records, and I filed all day long, and I had beautiful hangnails every day to represent all the filing that I did. And you know, it was very low on the totem pole, so I also remember coming back that Christmas and having to work Christmas Eve by myself. That was really an introduction into the real world for me. And even though my mom was there, she made no special considerations for me, so I actually had to earn my way, and so I definitely will never forget that job.
And after finishing working at Buckaloo, as I grew older, got my license, I was able to go up to the furniture store, and it was Kimball's furniture store, and I worked with a gentleman who drove the truck, and we delivered furniture. So I enjoyed that. It allowed me to save some money, and I bought my first car with that job at Kimball. Had fond memories of Lancaster. Even though my mother didn't want me to work, my dad allowed me to have a job, and that's the best thing that I can say for any child. That, you know, if you have a job and you're able to save money, and you're able to grow and be able to tell the story that nobody ever bought your car, you bought your own car. That's what I did.
First summer job was at the cotton mill at the Lancaster plant. I worked there when I was old enough to go to work at age 16. Worked second shift, and then worked at the Lancaster plant until I was 20, till I was a junior in college, actually. So I did 6 years there, and greatest experience of my life. Really was a important lesson in life, and a terrific work experience. There were about 3,000 people working at the mill when I was there, and it was a city unto itself. It really was. I remember trips to Springs Park with my family. We would go out and have picnics at the park. We would go swim at the Olympic-sized pool, as they like to talk about. I remember being overwhelmed by looking at those diving boards that seemed like they were as high as the Empire State Building. They seemed that large. So we would, and I went to Camp Springs, which was the kiddie camp that they had. Springs Park was a very, it was a very community-oriented place where you would go and could do all sorts of things. It was very kid-friendly. What I most remember about that place, though, is that they would give you these little coupons to, when you go on the property, you would have the things that they used to have at movie theaters, the small little tickets, and you would be given those to go buy things at places. So if you wanted to go get cotton candy, you had the little coupon, that little ticket that you used. If you wanted to go buy a hot dog at at one of the restaurants there, you'd do the same thing. Or if you wanted to ride the little train that they had, you would do that.
Well, my Saturdays growing up, my father was my best friend. And my father liked to fish. And we spent a lot of time on the Catawba River. And anytime the fish were biting, we were on the Catawba River. And we had our special places to go. I was asked about Springs Park. We had a little cove not far from Springs Park called Wildcat that we would go to catch crappies. So Saturdays, most of the time was with my dad. We spent a lot of time together. And most of the time it was work. If it wasn't fishing, he would find something to do in his garden, and he wanted his son with him. I didn't have any brothers, so Dad was my best buddy.
As a neighborhood, we played a lot of baseball, and I was one of the only girls in my neighborhood, so I ended up standing at the fence begging for an opportunity to get in every now and then. Well, and that was one of the things always, the culmination of Dixie Youth baseball season would end up at Springs Park, and that was always such a big day. And I remember the first time I finally decided to go up on the big diving board, which I don't know that I still today have seen a diving board like that ever. I mean, it was the highest thing ever, and almost always when I was there, someone would burst their eardrums or have some kind of injury, or actually get afraid and just go back down the ladder real quickly. So it was a great park. And they had the little train. I mean, there were just so many things to do there, and so many families. I mean, we just have big picnics out there, and yeah, it was a great place.
About 1966, I left Washington, D.C. and came back home. A lot of my friends from all over the country, they couldn't believe I was coming back home. I've been a lot of places, and I hadn't been any place that I liked better than Lancaster. And the fact that my father was still here, and I felt strongly about spending those last few years of his life with him. I've always thought that this was one of the greatest places in the world to live, and I still think that. So when I came back home, I didn't come back for any financial reward. I had friends from the big cities who wondered, why do you want to go back to Lancaster, South Carolina? But I knew that I didn't have to make a whole lot of money to be happy in Lancaster. All I needed to do was make enough to make ends meet and spend time with family. And I haven't regretted it.
I just love the family atmosphere of Lancaster. You know, I know it's a small town, but for me, I got to grow up with both sets of grandparents in town with me, and I've got to spend a lot of time with them, watch them cook and learn recipes from them, or learn secrets in the garden from them, or things like that. And I just think in some ways that's irreplaceable. At least for me, that was very important. And I knew that I knew a lot of people here. Lancaster was one of those places, you hear it takes a village to raise a child. And I definitely felt like Lancaster was that kind of community for me growing up. I know that my parents' friends would have felt like they could counsel me just like my parents could. And I really wanted that for my children too, because to me that means they care about you. And I do think this community cares about its citizens. They care about their young people. They care about the folks that are aging. And we really do try to take care of each other. And I do think it's special. And as I bring people here, even working now as I bring some of our executives to town. It's fun to hear them talk about that in that same way, how everybody knows everybody, and it's just a very warm community. You definitely get a very warm feeling from the people in Lancaster.
Dr. Boykin came, and he came back home, and I suppose he was instrumental also because I was impressed what he was doing as a physician. So I came back subsequent to his returning, and I found the same thing. We were accepted, as professionals, period. Not by the color of the skin, but what we could do to help. And I appreciate that open-mindedness.
I've often thought about that because we had, in my graduating class alone, we had multiple doctors. We had one unfortunate soul who became governor of South Carolina. We had just an incredibly talented group. Earlier today I was with Jimmy Addison, who grew up in Lancaster, a few years behind me, CEO of SCANA. I think when I look back on our hometown, it is has always been a small D Democratic place. And I say small D. Never had a country club there, so there was no, people weren't ostracized because they were not members of a certain club or were. It was a thriving, business-oriented town where people were judged on what they accomplished, not who their family was. It was very representative of the state. The demographics were about South Carolina's. It was, roughly 70% white and 30% African American. It was welcoming of newcomers. When new business began to come in the 60s into Lancaster, the people that did move in were welcomed with open arms and embraced as part of our community. I think there are a lot of reasons. The schools were good. But most importantly is people, I think in Lancaster, had genuine pride in the accomplishments of other people who were either born there or lived there. I felt when I ran for governor that it was a community project in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't have been successful if not. Billy Bone, who works with me, and myself, we represented Lancaster in the legislature. Neither of us had any family there. Which is, I always thought, a remarkable testament, not so much to us, but to the communities, that they would choose two people who really didn't have any relatives there to represent a place that was very family-oriented and had many people who did have real strong and deep family ties to the community. If I could say the reason why it's produced a lot of people that have been successful, I believe that the community and the schools encouraged people to do well. They embraced people taking chances to do things, and rather than ridiculing them for having seemingly foolish dreams, they embraced those dreams and were genuinely happy for them when they were successful. I mean, that's the sort of nurturing environment that you need to encourage people. And I think most importantly, when you look at people, and I hope to include myself in that group, who have gone away and done things, they all have genuinely fond memories of what the community did for them. I know a lot of people from other places who've done well, who don't share the feelings that I have about my hometown. They don't attribute as much of their success to their upbringing as they should, I think. But I honestly would say that the major factor in my success was the nurturing environment. My parents and my wife and my kids, of course, are a very important part of it, but the people that I grew up with and the people that I worked with, the people in my community who were so supportive, was a major part of that. And I dare say that the other people that you will interview who talk about their hometown of Lancaster will say the same thing.